Princeton University's Keller Center, educating leaders for a technology-driven society.
Welcome. My name is Vince Poor. I'm the Dean of Engineering here at Princeton. I really appreciate you all coming today, especially on such a nice summer day. I'm really delighted today that Frank Moss is our speaker, the first speaker this year in our Leadership in Technological World seminar series, which has been very, very well received over the past year. This seminar series is sponsored by our Center for Innovation and Engineering Education, which is led by Sharad Malik, who is here in front row. And I know many of you know about the center, but just in case you don't, I'll say a little bit about it. The center's about 2.5 years old now, and its purpose is fairly straightforward, at least to state. It's to prepare students, all students, engineers and non-engineers, to be leaders in an increasingly technological world. And one of the ways that the center approaches this is to expose students to leaders like Frank. And that's part of what this seminar series is about. Another way that the center has started to prepare students to be leaders is by exposing them to leaders in another way through an internship program that we started last summer called Preparing to Lead. This is a very competitive internship program run by the center in which students are selected to essentially shadow leaders in technological enterprises, CEOs, CTOs, and so forth. So it gives students an opportunity to be a fly on the wall in some important decision-making situations where people are making decisions involving all the complexities of technology and other things that come into business decisions. So we're very happy to have Frank here today. Frank is a serial entrepreneur. He's demonstrated leadership skills in a variety of settings, bringing innovative business technologies to market. Most recently, he co-founded and is on the board of Infinity Pharmaceuticals, which is an early-stage cancer drug discovery company. And incidentally, this company is in a space where we are increasingly moving in the engineering school, which is in the intersection of the life sciences and technology. He's also had a career in computer and software industries, including serving as CEO and chairman of Tivoli Systems, which is a pioneer in distributed systems management. He took it public in 1995, back in the glory days of taking things public, and subsequently it merged with IBM. He's also co-founded several other companies. I'll just mention a couple. Stellar Computer, which is a developer of graphics supercomputers, and B.S.E, which is a pioneer in the emerging field of web services. So you can see quite a diverse set of entrepreneurial contributions. You know, Frank is a Princeton alum. He graduated from our MAE department. He also received a Ph.D. and a master's degree and Ph.D. in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT. He now is just joining the board of trustees at Princeton. He has his first set of meetings this weekend. And he's been a member of our leadership council here in the school for several years, and we've really been fortunate to have his wise advice in the school. Frank has received a number of awards. I'll just mention a couple. The Ernst Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award. He was also named one of Forbes magazine's Leaders for Tomorrow. More recently, and I think we're going to hear a lot about this today, Frank was appointed director of the MIT Media Lab, where the idea of inventing and creating a better future comes to life. So Frank's talk is entitled Inventing a Better Future, and I think it'll give us an opportunity to hear more about that latest enterprise. So Frank, thank you for being here today, and please join me in welcoming Frank Moss.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that introduction. First lesson I've learned is you can never predict the future, and strange things happen. I went to school over there, across the street, and this fellow, Hisashi Kobayashi, was the fellow who hired me at IBM Research back in 1977. So things keep coming back at me. Somehow you go forward in life and maybe you start moving back, you know. Next I'll be back at my high school, I think. Maybe as a counselor or something, I don't know what. But it's a great pleasure to be here, and I congratulate Vince and the faculty here on the Center for Innovation Engineering Education. It's a terrific program, and you know, I think it's a very exciting development for Princeton. I think everything that's going on in the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences right now is very exciting. So it's just terrific to have been part of this and to watch it. I'll just spend a little bit of time today talking to you more or less off the cuff, but then I'll get to a canned presentation about the Media Lab, because a lot of people are kind of curious about what's going on at the Media Lab. How many people have heard of the Media Lab? Okay, great. How many people have been to the Media Lab? Okay, a few. You may not recognize that as the Media Lab if you've been there. That's a brand new building. That's we broke ground for that a couple of weeks ago, really. And within 2 years, that spectacular structure will actually be realized and really take the Media Lab into a new direction. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm humbled by the invitation here. I've taken, on the plane down here, I took a few notes. You know, I mean, you've got the opportunity to listen to captains of industry and, you know, prominent public figures, and, you know, from Princeton, you've got all these financial wizards and celebrities and so forth. You picked me. I'm very humbled. And so, you know, I suppose I'm supposed to give you words of inspiration and things that you take with you for the rest of your life. And so I felt a little bit of pressure there to kind of get that over with, and then we'll see where it goes from here. So we'll try and get that out of the way. And I was thinking about that, you know, what words of wisdom might I give you that really, you every night before you went to sleep, you think about that, you know. And so I thought back, and when I was a little bit older than most of the folks in this room, not all the folks in this room, but most, early in my career, I was fortunate to have a dinner with a retiring business person, entrepreneur out in California, and somebody turned to him after, you know, the award was given and said, you know, what would you have done differently in your career if you could do one thing, or in your life if you could do one thing differently? And he thought, and he scratched his head, and you know, everybody's like leaning forward, and then he says, one thing I'd done differently, I would have flossed every night. I think about that every night now. So there it goes. Every night you're going to think about that, and you're going to associate that with me. You know, it's not going to leave you. Trust me. You know, and take that advice. It's really good advice. You know, I began to think about you know, why the other subject that I began to think about is why Princeton alumni really are such successful leaders and entrepreneurs and business people, and you know, in all areas, in business, in the public sphere, in entertainment. I mean, they way outstrip their numbers and their ranks. You know, what is it about Princeton people that really enables them to do that? And I think we've spoken about that a good deal within the engineering school and elsewhere. So seriously, I began to think about, you know, what it is that I had observed during my career, mostly by observing others, but sometimes through my own experience, both success and failures, really were kind of the things that I kind of held on to as a leader. You know, what are the, you know, kind of, not so much the magic bullets, but the big ideas. And these are things that, you know, I talk to young people about and people in my companies about. And I'll tell you, there are three things that really stand out for me. One is a leader is able to paint a picture, a very vivid picture of a better future. Whether it's the future of a company, the future of a society, of any kind of enterprise, could be academic. A leader is able to paint that picture and then inspire other people to that vision. And I think that's probably the most important thing that you can be able to do. And I think Princeton graduates are very well positioned to do that, namely because in order to get into Princeton, you have to paint a picture of the future on your application and your interviews. So it's kind of a self-selecting thing. If you've gotten in here, you're probably pretty good at doing that kind of thing. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. So that's number one. And really, that's the thing that both in startup companies, large companies that I was in, and now at MIT and elsewhere, or other kind of not-for-profit enterprises that I've been involved in, the real leaders have been the ones who can paint that vivid picture. Often it's like a story. And it's clear and it's simple. It's not complex because people roll their eyes when it gets too complex. And it often takes a lot of time to get that story. Stories take time. Visions and pictures take time. But if you commit yourself to that, that's, I think, the first mark of a leader. The second mark of a leader is people often ask, well, how do you make the right decisions? You know, tell me some decisions you've made and you know, what critical points? Well, it's not all about, in my view, making the right decisions. Being successful in business or any enterprise as a leader, in my view, is about creating an environment where people can work together to accomplish that vision that you've painted. In other words, leaders are designers, really. They design cultures and they design environments. And the kind of, and Vince is developing that here, and he's creating that, and I'm trying to do that at the Media Lab, and I've done that at other companies, sometimes successfully. People in all great enterprises have created an environment where people can really thrive and really operate and collaborate together. And so, you know, I think Princeton alumni are really very well positioned to do that as well, because the key thing in creating or designing an environment for success is to create an atmosphere of trust. And that's it, just one word. Remember, floss nightly, and then trust. And I really mean that. It's very important, because if you can create, whether you're a startup company or you're running a Fortune 100 company or an academic institution or whatever, if you're able to create an environment of trust among everybody in the company, then without trust, nothing is possible. And with trust, everything is possible. And the rest is just details. How do you create an environment of trust? It really depends on, on where you're at and the different kinds of environments and constraints that you have. But the one thing that I've found is always, as a leader, to communicate your insistence upon open, honest, and direct communication. It's all about communication. So whether you're in a department like this or you're in a startup of 3 people, you're running a company of 3,000 or 300,000, it's all about creating an environment where people actually say what they think. Now, they say what they believe to be the case. It may or may not be true. I've rarely encountered that. At MIT, to be candid with you, they're not there, to be honest. And I think academic environments sometimes are tough in that regard. But the best startups I've ever had, they were companies where we looked at each other squarely in the eye and we said, look, this is what I think. Now, you may not like this. I'm not even sure that it's true, but this is what I think. And when you get into that kind of a zone where you have that relationship within your company, you won't believe. I mean, the kind of things that happen are amazing. Whether you're trying to create a new product. I was in a company, Lotus Development, somewhere along this checkered career of mine. It was a software developer, the developer of Lotus 1, 2, 3. Anybody remember that one? Well, yeah, it's kind of a distant memory, isn't it? But when I was in that company, it was bigger than Microsoft. That was 1989. In 1989, Lotus Development and Lotus 1, 2, 3 was bigger than Microsoft. The problem with our company, though, was that nobody spoke the truth. Nobody was willing to say to the leader of that company that OS2, that was an operating system that IBM happened to be working on, was not going to make it, and that it looked like Windows was the winner. And so everybody at Lotus kept working on 1, 2, 3 for OS2 and ignoring Windows, even though everybody knew that it was the wrong thing to do, because the leader of the company simply didn't want to hear that. And nobody was willing to stand up and tell them, this may not be what you want to hear, but this is the truth. And that company literally sacrificed, I think, one of the most advantageous positions in the software industry ever, simply because people were not comfortable with telling the truth. They weren't lying, they just weren't telling the truth. They weren't liars, they were good people, actually. A great group of people at Lotus Development. And I've seen that. It was true at IBM early in my career. This fellow right here had a great culture in his group. We were in research. But at the rest of IBM, seemed like nobody would work up the line and tell anybody what was really going on in the industry. So, that's just kind of what I want to leave you with in terms of what I think is the most important thing that a leader can do, which is create an environment where people have trust in one another and are willing to talk freely. Incidentally, my opinion about decisions is that there are no right or wrong decisions in a company. There really aren't. I mean, there are many ways to get from A to B. The only decision that's wrong is one that's not made. And so if you don't make decisions, if you've got an environment where people along the way can stop anything, when any one individual can stop a decision from being made, or you as a leader are not willing to say, I've heard enough discussion, let's just make this decision, then you've got a problem. But I'll tell you, in my experience, I've never seen a situation where a decision well made and timely made was actually wrong. You just learn from it. You make the decision, you go, it's like, I always think of it's like going to the moon. Back in 1968 and 69, when we went to the moon, we actually didn't know how to navigate directly from Earth orbit to the lunar landing. What we knew how to do was get into orbit, then do a translunar injection, and along the way we kept correcting and correcting. Actually, the navigation systems were not capable of doing it from the very beginning. We never would have gone to the moon if we really had to target it directly. And as you got closer to the moon, you made those corrections. And I think the same thing is true in companies or any leadership position. Make that decision. My advice to you is just make it, okay? Take it, take the direction, learn from it. If it's wrong, learn from it. And I think learning organizations are important. So those are the things that I've found along the way are some of the most important things. Third, I promised you three things, right? The first thing was paint this vivid picture of where to go. Then the second thing is design this environment to enable people to work together to get there. The third thing is always give a short speech at the holiday party. That's all. If you do those three things, at the holiday party, just say the following thing, okay? When you have a holiday party, just say, I want to thank you all for everything you did last year and all the sacrifices you made, particularly the spouses and significant others. I now want to thank you in advance for everything you're going to do next year, particularly spouses and significant others. Third, I want to make sure that everybody just appoints a driver to take you home tonight. Have a good holiday, and the Christmas bonuses will be in your paycheck within a day. And then just sit down. I don't think that Princeton alumni are equipped to do that. So I honestly think that may be the biggest thing that we have to learn. I've kind of noticed that along the way in my careers. I've kind of watched people, and actually people love a leader who's succinct and to the point. I haven't proved that here today, unfortunately, but there really is a lesson in that, I think. In that when people go on and on and on, you just don't convince anybody of anything. And I think trust in leaders is when you can just express something succinctly and move on. And nobody wants to kill the fun at the holiday party with a long speech. It's not the time to talk about the budget or the goals for next year. So those are really, I think, some of the things that I wanted to talk about. And maybe toward the end of the discussion here, after I talk a little bit about the Media Lab, I'd be happy to open it up and answer questions. So let me tell you a little bit about the Media Lab. Everybody wants to know what's going on there, at least. First of all, let me tell you how I got to the Media Lab and why I'm there. It's kind of strange. I didn't, no more than I expected to be standing next to Hisashi Kobayashi here when I graduated Princeton back in '71 did I expect to be at the Media Lab. Here's kind of how it happened. I graduated Princeton, and then I went to MIT, got a degree from there, went on and worked for Hisashi at IBM Research, and I kind of blew out of IBM Research at a time before it was popular to leave IBM. One of the reasons was, it was quite simple. I was the first user of something called an Apollo computer. Anybody hear of Apollo computer? Only a few. This was actually an engineering Unix workstation that appeared before Sun, and had all the goodies of distributed operating systems in it that we are still trying to get today. And so, since IBM didn't have anything like that, I was working for Hisashi. I said, let's get in some other equipment and maybe build some systems on this thing. So I got a bunch of Apollo computers, and I was the first customer. And we hooked it all up, great networking, shared file system, all those cool things. Single namespace, it was unbelievable. We took the IBM Office systems and ported it to that and actually showed how you can run a system off a mainframe. How you can actually leave the mainframe and run all these IBM systems. And then I took it around the company to higher and higher level executives trying to get a couple $1 million to create a new program within IBM to build distributed computing systems. That was my interest. And got all the way to the top, and the guy looked at it and he said, yeah, looks pretty good. The next day, however, I got back to the office, and Hisashi, who was my supervisor, got a note from the president of IBM then, who said, we saw Frank Moss's presentation. What really disturbed us was he brought in other vendors' equipment. And we're now passing a rule within IBM that if you can do it on IBM equipment, you've got to do it on IBM equipment. Now, there's a case where nobody was telling this guy what was going on in the world, right? This was the president of IBM who had no idea that the open systems movement was in full movement. He still believed that IBM could own everything. Anyway, I got out of there. And I went to Apollo. That just began a sequence of different companies that I was at in the high-tech field. Vince told you a little bit about that. And then after a while, I took a look at myself about the age of 50. That was around a few years back at the millennium. And my kids came, I turned 50 around the millennium. It was time to start to rethink things. And my kids came up to me and they said, okay, Dad, you've been selling software to overweight white guys in IT departments all your life. I mean, is that what you're telling us? You're telling us you're going to make a difference in the world? And that's what you tell your kids, you make a difference in the world, find a way of just doing something great. And they said, what are you going to do? And I said, oh, you're right. And that was one of those epiphanies for me. My kids just saying that made me begin to think and look. And I actually exited my company, Tivoli Systems, which I had then ironically sold back to IBM. Now actually I was kicking butt of the people who actually gave me trouble there. That was kind of fun for a while. But began to look for more meaning in my life and how I could take what I'd learned here at Princeton and MIT and these various companies that I've been in and do something good for human beings. How can I make a real difference in the world? Do what I told my kids that I was urging them to do. Was lucky to be attached to or be able to make contact with some really cool people at MIT. By now I was back in Boston. And I was interested, I was reading about the human genome and how computers were being used to sequence the genome and to understand how cells worked and all that kind of good stuff. And I was put in touch with Eric Lander, who was a Princeton graduate. I know you know him well. And he was then leading the Human Genome Project. He made a deal with me. If you teach me about information technology, I'll teach you all about biology. And you just take me to dinner at Hammersley's, which is his favorite restaurant. And we did, and it was a great exchange, something that I'd never done before in my life, which was just take the time at that stage to just say, I'm going to learn something new and something different, and really take a change in pace. And that led to a sequence of events whereby I co-founded the drug discovery company that Vince referred to in about the year 2000, whose major focus, in addition to certain biological premises, is that computers and information technology can greatly accelerate the process of discovering drugs. It's something that a lot of people have been thinking about and working on. And within 3 years, we got our first drug to clinical trial in record time, greatly aided by the fact that all our biologists and all our chemists and all our medicinal chemists were all using a single file system and sharing a single set of data along the process. Things keep coming back. And so that was very exciting. But the company came along and actually went public a little while ago, and I began to look around again because I'm not a biotech guy. We'd gotten that to a certain stage when I got a call from the MIT Media Lab, or from MIT, and they said, we're looking for a director for the Media Lab. And I laughed. I said, that's it. You got the wrong guy. And I gave him a few names. I think I gave him Vince's name, I'm not sure. I gave, a few names. Why don't you call these guys up, But then I went down, after a while they convinced me to come down and have a look. The Media Lab is about 20 minutes from my home. And I'll tell you, I fell in love with it because they were doing so many things there. So much of the research that they were involved in really has, I think, a great chance of making a huge difference for the quality of life of people. And that was very different from the gadgets and the gizmo and the kind of cool, playful thing that I had, during my career come to appreciate as what the Media Lab was all about. I was one of those who thought the Media Lab was a little bit kind of superficial and playful and this kind of thing. Well, it is, because as I'll show you in a moment, that's very much a part of the philosophy. So what I'd like to do is just share with you for a few moments here now, a little while, what's going on at the Media Lab and why why I was attracted to the lab and the kinds of difference it's going to make. So I'm just going to go through this a bit. And please, feel free to interrupt me on anything and ask questions. I'd be happy to engage. Did I get a question there?
No, that was just cough.
Oh, just cough. Okay, great. So what is going to be my success in my tenure at the Media Lab? What do I look at? And what I tell my people, the faculty and the students and everybody that I come in contact with is, if in 10 years, when somebody drives by this new building, they look up and they say, "Thank you, Media Lab," that'll be success. Not, "Oh, gee, I wonder what's going on in there." I think it costs $300,000 to get in the door, which is kind of what it was until now. So that's a vision. That's the picture I'm painting. It's a new building, and it's a new, as I'll describe in a few moments, I think a new mission for the Media Lab. We'll continue to work on cool gadgets and gizmos. I usually bring a whole bag full of them to show off. But since I was flying and I had to bring a couple of suits for the Board of Trustees meeting, I didn't have any room. I threw them out. But I did bring one gadget and gizmo. I have it in here. I'll show you a little bit later, which I think is pretty interesting. So that's it. That's a vision for the future. And let's see what that means. First of all, what is the Media Lab all about? A couple of key points. What's different about the Media Lab is it's actually an academic department called Media Arts and Sciences. They actually made me a professor, the Jerome Wiesner Professor of Media Arts and Sciences. That's kind of a joke. But they told me you got to have a professor title if you're in a university to really get anywhere. And so I've actually discovered that's true. So I don't think so. I'm just being kidding. But at any rate, it's actually a department called Media Arts and Sciences and a research lab, and they're equivalent. That means that the courses that students take and the research that they do and the research that faculty is engaged in are all intertwined and very well integrated. It's very neat. So there are not a lot of required courses like there are here or in most graduate schools. We give master's and Ph.D. degrees. We have about 150 master's and Ph.D. students. Undergraduate students love to hang around the Media Lab, though, and we usually have about 100 to 150 to make things really interesting. The young lady who was caught at Logan Airport the other day wearing the circuit board on her sweatshirt was one of our favorite undergraduates. She was. We were very proud of that. The president of MIT, who's a wonderful person, actually apologized for that, and we were appalled. We said, "What? Come on, But at any rate, that doesn't happen too often. But 150 graduate students. Master's, PhD degrees, very well integrated. And that's part of the genius of Nicholas Negroponte, who, together with Jerome Wiesner, founded the lab about 25 years ago. They were actually, Jerome Wiesner, who was the president of MIT, and actually John F. Kennedy's science advisor in 1960, 61, 62, stepped down from being president of MIT and said, research at MIT sucks, okay? Research in the academic world sucks. We've got to reinvent it. I'm, just kind of paraphrasing him. I kind of doubt he said that, but that was essentially, what he did. And he said, I'm going to get this young Turk Negroponte, who, got his PhD by the time he was 21 or 22 in the architecture department, and we're going to reinvent it. And that's what they did on the eastern end of campus, in the building that was not shown here, but an IMP building. They crafted what they thought would be an ideal architecture or design for a really cool academic research lab. It's completely funded by sponsors, by industrial sponsors, which is the second bullet. And basically, Wiesner and Negroponte went to industrial sponsors all the way from big media companies to IBM and Hewlett-Packard and Motorola and consumer product companies and GM. And he said, give me $500,000 a year and we'll do with it what we want. And you'll like it. And that was a good vision. And these are great sales guys, literally, and that's how the lab was formed. One thing I discovered that was a very interesting fact to me when I was at the last SEAS Council was that Princeton, the total amount of money that Princeton gets for research, to fund its research from industry, I think is about $30 or $35 million a year. Or in the last year, it varies depending on whether some patent that comes through. But it's about that range. Yeah, that's the total amount of money that Princeton gets for research funding. The Media Lab is a $35 million a year budget. And so this business model, if you will, for the Media Lab was genius. Because although today, my big challenge at the Media Lab is to connect sponsors. You can imagine that the proposition I just told you before, which is give me your money and we'll do what we want and you'll like it, doesn't work with CIOs in the world of 2007. Hasn't worked very well since 9/11. But the genius of it is that sponsors still come to the lab with the expectation that they're going to get value out of things that we do without them ever telling us what it is, because that will tell them what's around the corner. This will tell them things that they're not thinking about, enable them to ask questions. So it's very cool. And finally, you have the students, you have the faculty, you have the sponsors, and all this is now inspired by the opportunity to improve the human condition. When I went to MIT to get my graduate degree in 1972 after I left here, I was very disappointed by my experience there. It was a great place to get a degree, the Aeronautical Engineering Department, and I did my research in the Laboratory for Information and Decision Sciences. You may have heard of that. I mean, it was terrific faculty, but the students didn't give a damn about what was going on in the world. I mean, I'm sure that's not entirely true, but it's the feeling that I got being there, especially after coming from Princeton those 4 years, which was an opposite experience. So I left there, but then I come back a year and a half, 2 years ago, and MIT students really, in spite of the fact that they wear these things on there, so MIT students, as a general matter, really care about social issues. They're heavily involved. Undergraduates particularly, but the graduate students, I'm very impressed by the way in which MIT has managed to change its stripes over the years. And the students who come through the Media Lab, both the undergraduate students and the master's and Ph.D. students, they just have such a tremendous passion for working with kids who are underprivileged, working with kids in the third world, working with people with autism, Alzheimer's disease, you name it. This is really what turns them on. Now, there are a few there that are interested in investment banking and private equity, but not as many as you'd think, given the society today. So that's kind of the basic nature of the Media Lab. My challenge is to take what is actually a tremendous business model, this business model funded by industry. Incidentally, all the IP that's developed at the Media Lab is the ownership of all the sponsors. And there are no secrets at the Media Lab. So every sponsor can know everything else that's going on. So it's a very unique model, but one that ran its course. It was like a dot-com course that it ran. And when 9/11 hit, our sponsors were the companies that now looked for ROI. And so my challenge at the Media Lab is to preserve the best of the model that Wiesner and Negroponte invented, but now make new connections that are appropriate here. And those new connections are helping our sponsors connect better with the research, even though we don't take orders from our sponsors. We don't do directed research, but we now have to integrate with them. To improve the academic program, which incidentally was not a big focus for the Media Lab over the years, so I've got some terrific folks. Mitch Resnick is one of them. You may have heard about him in learning and technology. He's one of the leaders there. And Patty Mays, who has done a lot of the work over the years in collaborative filtering. They're the heads of my academic department, and we're investing quite a bit to improve the quality of instruction to our students in a way, and the quality of the research output and publications in a way that the Media Lab has not really been known for in the past. Let me just talk about this culture at the Media Lab. What you're seeing here is, sure.
So, what was the connection between 9/11 and the change in sponsor attitudes?
Well, the change in 9/11 was, at that point in time, I roughly say 9/11, I'm talking about the dot-com bust.
Okay.
Right, and then when I was in business at that time, the dot-com thing was starting to melt down about 2000. When 9/11 hit, I was trying to sell software to large companies, and that stopped. And I think the same thing, the $200,000 to $300,000 sponsorship, they'd look through and they go, oh, MIT Media Lab? That went. Fortunately, they didn't all go, and a lot of folks stuck around, a lot of big sponsors and traditional sponsors, and really, I think we've got a different kind of thing going on. So what you just saw was a stop frame. This is a lab that might not be unlike many you find here at Princeton nowadays, but this is typical to the Media Lab. It's an open building. Students come and they build. Everything is about building at the Media Lab. It's about creating a demo, not just writing a paper. In this particular case, Corey Kidd, who will be on Good Morning America tomorrow at I think 7:30 or 8 o'clock, talking about his weight loss robot for elderly people. You see he's assembled about a dozen of them here. He built the entire innards of this robot, except for some of the circuitry, obviously, and the actuators, in the core of the Media Lab. In the basement of the Media Lab is about $30 million worth of equipment. Laser jet cutters, fabrication equipment, all the way from atomic gene synthesis all the way to just milling large pieces of structural equipment. You can build anything at the Media Lab. And that resource that we have that we're now establishing in the new building is really part of the magic secret sauce, because students can come in and build anything. I call it antidisciplinary, not multidisciplinary, because at the Media Lab, nobody wants to hear about disciplines. Scientists and engineers and designers, artists, they all mix together. Nobody has a discipline. Nobody identifies themselves as one type or another. I think that's the right way to go. I think when people talk about multidisciplinary, I think they're not being really aggressive enough. We all know the importance of that. It's an atelier style. The Media Lab looks like an artist studio. It's kind of junky. There's stuff everywhere. People are creating and experimenting, and you'll see, as you might in an artist studio, you'll see paintings from 10 or 20 years ago. You'll see all the old creations around the lab. But you'll see brand new ones, and all the time they're coming up. But it's that open creativity and play that was the philosophy of Seymour Papert, who was one of the early innovators and folks involved in artificial intelligence at MIT. And he was a proponent of constructivism, which basically says that learning and invention are basically promoted by building and by playing. And he brought Logo into the world based on that. Lego Mindstorms came out of his work, and the $100 laptop came out of his work. And that's really what the Media Lab is all about. It's not really all about a sandbox. It's all about the philosophy of Seymour Papert and what innovation is all about. One of the things that really appealed to me about the philosophy of the Media Lab over the years was they have what I call an aversion to asymmetries. And so when anything is asymmetric, it kind of makes them nuts. And so when they saw mainframes, they said, why can't people have computers? And what would they do with those computers if they had it? When they saw the global hegemony of the media industry, centralizing in the hands of a few people, the creation and dissemination of news, they said, what if everybody had the ability to publish a newspaper? And the area of electronic publishing came out of the Media Lab. And a group of seniors in Melrose, Massachusetts today publish the Melrose Mirror regularly. They're in their 90s, based on software that they acquired in experimentation from the Media Lab. The Media Lab looks at the fact that only people with musical backgrounds create music, and they say that's ridiculous. What about everybody else? So they have a real, I call it aversion to asymmetries, and that's really driven the research. I'm not going to go through this. Some of you will recognize some of the things that have come out of the Media Lab. Some of these things you might think of as being a little superficial, wearable computing, fun, interesting. Was it really deep? I think it is. But a lot has come out of the Media Lab over the years, and probably, to be candid with you, and maybe this is being a bit defensive, I think the reputation of the Media Lab, that it was kind of playful and superficial, was really promoted mostly by the media, who liked to come into the Media Lab because it was good news stories. An alarm clock that rolls off the table and then runs around the floor till you capture it, that's more interesting than than a biohybrid prosthetic and the technology that enables living tissue to interface with artificial tissue and the science that goes behind that. So we're also working very hard, I think, to have people understand that the Media Lab really is operating at a much deeper level. I'll share with you a few of the projects that are doing that. So, at any rate, that's my challenge at the Media Lab. I find it an interesting one, and I will tell you that although I haven't been there long enough to validate the three principles that I told you before, I'm really going by those. I mean, that's what's guiding me at the Media Lab, which is basically trying to paint a picture of where we're going, trying to create the environment now where people work together, and I've tried to keep the Christmas greeting short. So let me give you my view a little bit, real quickly here, of the framework in which we're working now at the Media Lab. People ask, well, okay, the Media Lab, Nicholas Negroponte wrote the book Being Digital. Anybody read the book Being Digital here? It was actually written in 1995. And it's amazing. I mean, when I came to the Media Lab, I read that book. I'd never read it when it came out. I mean, it really was prophetic. It really was. He's an amazing guy. He predicted that technology would enter everyday life, would it be a part of our lives. And we take that for granted now, but even in 1995, the idea that technology would become a part of our lives was really not popular. Certainly not in 1985. The thought of a home computer was unthinkable. And so I've asked myself the question, and we asked ourselves the question, the digital revolution, are we there yet? I mean, is this really something that has kind of arrived and is maturing and where we're basically just going to be polishing the faucets now? And that's kind of the question I ask, and reflect back a little bit to what we thought the revolution was going to be like. This is a fellow who I did come into contact a bit with, but really didn't know very well, J.C.R. Licklider, who I'm sure some of you probably did. He was one of the great computer scientists, responsible in many ways for time sharing and many of the projects at MIT that led to computer architectures. He wrote the seminal paper on man-computer symbiosis in 1968. And I find this quote interesting out of his paper, Man-Computer Symbiosis. In a few years, men will be able to communicate more effectively through a machine than face-to-face. The first thing is interesting, he used the term men. Never happened today, but I left it in. I'll have to apologize. This is what he said. But when you look at, it was 1968, people used the term men, it was okay. But I really have ruminated on that quite a bit. And I don't believe, for all that, I'm not sure where my cell phone is now, and our PDAs and our laptops and our other devices, I don't really believe in my gut that we communicate more effectively now that we did. He had this vision, and I'm not exactly sure what he meant. I mean, he started to attach people through time sharing through a centralized computer where they could, share files and all this kind of thing. But when I really read through that paper, he really kind of implied that this would change what it meant to be human. Not just that we would be able to, talk anywhere to anybody else and say the same thing, or say it in the same way, or communicate in the same way. So I think that's pretty interesting. Jerome Wiesner, who I mentioned before, the founder of the Media Lab, and ex-president of MIT, said the study of man-made and living systems would prosper in an environment where they could nurture each other. And when I think about technology today, I don't really think that we've accomplished that yet. And I've read through his books and papers, and I think we've fallen short. At an event at the Media Lab, or at MIT in May, we had Oliver Sacks, the famous brain scientist and author and professor now at Columbia, and he gave a tremendous keynote speech on his view of this question. Is technology really more effective? And he said we must humanize technology before it dehumanizes us. So he's very much of the opinion that we really have a lot of work to do. And this is kind of the reality check. I mean, yes, we shop and we search and we socialize. We get all our entertainment on the net now, and we do many, many different things. We communicate and friend on the network. But look at it. I don't have to tell you the increase, whether it's just because of diagnosis or other factors of autism, Alzheimer's disease, addiction is an all-time high, both things like alcohol addiction, gambling addiction, anxiety and stress is pervasive in our society. It's an epidemic, and it's getting worse in high schools and college and everywhere. So, we've got a lot of problems. This is just the A's. It's kind of humbling when you look at that and you say, has technology really made a difference? This is kind of how I view the next stage of technology. Everybody kind of has their curve and their errors of technology and their waves. But the way I kind of, I'll get out of the way here, characterize this, if we look back at the 80s, early 90s, when Moore's Law was really in full bore, increasing the power of chips, the personal computer came into being, and we empowered people with applications and with connectivity, and we made people more productive, presumably, with computers, and we began to connect them. Then sometime during the late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, Metcalfe's law began to take place, the power of the network. And people find this surprising because I've said here that everything that's occurred to date, driven by the network, by the web, by digital technology and devices and communication, when measured in terms of the impact on people, really the impact on people's lives, I think it's been almost linear. I mean, I think very little has changed in really the substantive impact on our lives. And I believe that this is an exciting time to be in this field, to be director of the Media Lab or to be involved in any way, because I believe that we're about to undergo an exponential rise, a really, really steep curve right now, to the degree which technology will impact the quality of life for people. And in fact, what's really going to change is we're going to move from the network and the processor being the driver to people's inner capabilities, their adaptability, as I call it. Human adaptability, when connected with technology, is going to begin to solve and attack a number of these societal problems. This is just kind of my view of the things that are going on, say, beyond Moore and Metcalf. I'm not going to go into this great detail. These are things that you know well about. Advances in biology all the way from the molecular level to the human level, our understanding now of new models of the brain, how we think, how we behave, how we can interface with that, new models of the body. Right here, Hugh Hare, Media Lab professor, I'll talk about a little bit later, has completely modeled the human body and how it works and creates prosthetics now that really fit with that model and adapt to the human being in a way that's never been done before, but that's also true for the way in which our mind works. And so we're developing new models of the human, the brain, the body, social behavior, and now we're beginning to really have available to us resources online in the virtual world that will be able to interface with those new models of the human being. Yes, we all know about Second Life in the virtual world. Maybe it's a dead end. But it's only the very beginning. Our ability to simulate in real time, three-dimensional things, that's not old virtual reality. That's going to change things in a big way. We got to ask the question, how is that going to change when we actually connect that with human beings? When, for example, we can have avatars that really can understand people, acquire their personalities, understand how we think and behave, and interface with us. And finally, the real world, this is just a conceptual picture, but the way I think about it is, the real world in 2007 is beginning to obtain a nervous system. It never really had it. Whether it's our cell phone, whether it's a dog tag, whether it's a smart Pepsi machine, which we're building at the Media Lab, within a few years, everything is going to be able to communicate via Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and wireless, to the sense that really everything that goes on in our society, in the world, will be able to be attached to human beings in the virtual world. And so these three things really working together, the interrelation between humans, the upgrade to the virtual world and the real world, I think are going to begin to blur the distinction between human abilities and disabilities. And to me, that's very inspiring. The idea that we go much deeper than technology has done in the past. And let me, this is kind of a map of what goes on at the Media Lab in this area. And I'll only hit a few of these to give you some examples today. But we believe that human adaptability, the ability to blur the distinction between abilities and disabilities, will take place in everything, from our ability to be creative, to our ability to communicate, to do commerce, to express ourselves, to learn. We're going to go much deeper in terms of human abilities. Let me, the time I have left, just hit a few, which I think you might find interesting. In May, we did we had a big symposium at MIT called H2.0 for Human 2.0, where we displayed some of these technologies. I'm going to go forward here a little bit because we're short on time. And let me just tell you about some of the things that we displayed there and some of the projects that we're working on at the Media Lab. Professor Roz Picard is one of the developers of effective computing with an A, the idea that computers, technology can actually understand and relate to people emotionally. So it's emotions-based computing. And her primary interest is in whether or not we can use technology to understand how autistic people think, how their mind works, and whether we can now decode that, compare that to how non-autistic people think, and then provide various tools that enable them to communicate and socialize with others in a way that they can't today. Redefining communication for autistic people is really what it's all about here. And we demonstrated, actually live and on stage, a device or some devices that Roz and her group of students have developed using effective computing technology that enables a child with autism or a person with autism or anyone to actually use a lot of existing technology in facial tracking and recognition. Here you see the dots here, to, on the left-hand side, translate those the facial motions, the head nod, the lip pursing, the smile or the grin, the nod this way or that, into emotions down here. So as time goes on, it's detecting those various facial gestures and so forth, and in real time translating those into whether the person is confused or thinking or interested, disagreeing, agreeing, bored, mad, angry, all those kinds of things. And we're testing that at the Groden Center outside of Providence with kids who are autistic. And we provided them with a couple of kinds of devices which I find interesting. One is the hat cam on the left, which you're able to capture other people's expressions, so the expression of people you're looking at, and then understand that, or a self cam that enables you to better understand your own expressions that you're transmitting. The work that we've done with the children, the kids at the Groden Center, has been enormously promising. And what it's really told us, I think, is that we did not bother to understand how autistic people communicated. They communicate in a very different way than we do, and their ability to communicate is enormous as long as you understand how it works. And I think devices and technologies like this are beginning to unlock that. One of the top autistic bloggers on the web, Amanda Baggs, has anybody read any of Amanda's blogging? She's amazing. Has been working with us. She's an associate at the Media Lab, and she really believes that she's, in the past couple of months even, discovered aspects of herself that she never even knew existed. And she was very skeptical about the ability for technology to go beyond just voice synthesis. And so we're very optimistic about that. I'd like to introduce you briefly. This is one of my favorite projects, just gives you a different flavor of what's going on at the Media Lab today. Professor Hugh Hare. Professor Hare, one of our youngest professors, lost both of his legs in a climbing accident on Mount Washington, ice climbing accident at the age of 17. They told him that he would never really walk normally again, but he certainly wouldn't ice climb. Well, he was not the kind of guy who took that lightly. He got a degree at MIT and a degree at Harvard Medical School. He's now a professor of biomechatronics at the Media Lab. And he asked basically the question, what would happen if we can upgrade our bodies? His vision is not just to understand how the human body operates, to restore motion to people who are amputees, but to normal people. And in fact, over the past couple of days, the national press has been doing a lot of coverage of our exoskeleton, which is really, really being designed for elderly people, trying to get to the point where we can provide an exoskeleton that would provide them with natural motion and mobility well past the age of 80 and 90. What this is all about, biomechatronics, his discipline, is creating incredibly, by studying actual bodies and studying actual biology, to create very complex models of how the body moves, up and down, how it adjusts and balances. They've created some incredibly accurate and high fidelity models and algorithms of how that works, and they've designed these smart robotic prosthetics to adapt to the body itself and to the conditions. And we've been working with Iraq, amputees, Iraq veterans. First, and this was probably about a year or two old here. Let me see if I can get this going. What you'll see here is our knee. We call it the Rio knee, which has a full motor in it. Most prosthetics have nothing but springs in it. Active damping that detects the speed of motion, the angles of motion, is continually running a full simulation model within the knee itself of the human being, and adjusting both the damping and the energy being put into this knee. And you'll see as this fellow goes faster, the knee adapts to his motion. It's just amazing to watch what a smart, intelligent device that really understands how the body adapts can do when changing the world of prosthetics. Let me show you another one. Turns out that everything's in the ankle. Our motion and the gait that we have in walking really comes from the ankle. Nobody's really attacked the problem of how you make a prosthetic ankle. If you look at this graph here, it really shows that as the gait proceeds, this is just through one cycle of the gait, the amount of energy that goes into that ankle from your muscle. And what we found is, in modeling this and studying it, that a tremendous amount of energy goes through, and of course, the amount of energy goes through depends upon the speed at which you're walking in the various conditions. Model that and then produce an ankle that imitates that, rather than ankles today, which are basically just pieces of metal at best, or maybe just some springs and dampers. And we've just recently announced, in collaboration with Brown University, the powered ankle, which Professor Hare wears around the Media Lab. He wears both powered knees and powered ankles, and walks 3 or 4 times as fast. I'm talking about walk, not run, as you and I do. The powered ankle is meant to make walking easier. When you're an amputee and you have a prosthetic, you probably can't go more than an hour or two because the amount of energy that goes into actually controlling that is enormous. We've had, Hugh has been wearing this now for 2 months, and he says his back feels fine. It also enables you to walk faster. So real quickly, since I'm short on time, here was one of the first trials of the powered ankle in the atrium of the Media Lab. This you might recognize here. This was an Iraq veteran who had been wearing all kinds of prosthetics. You'll notice that in this version, a lot of the power supply, the computation is in a backpack. And this fellow was just delighted with this. We're working with the Veterans Administration and amputees, mostly from the Iraq War, and fitting many of them with this ankle and making measurements today. It's just amazing to see these fellows and their reaction. One of the things I'd like to show you just real quickly, because I found this interesting. I should have gone through this. We're going to go forward here, actually. So that's another project that's going on at the Media Lab. We're doing work on robotics. You've probably heard of the work, or may have, of Professor Cynthia Brazil. She has been studying how to make robots more human and interact with human beings in a natural way for a long time. A fascinating project. She asked the question, what if we could create robots that can interact with people socially, emotionally, make a connection with them, much as we human beings make connections with one another, and if we can friend them in social networks. We're using these to connect kids with grandparents in the far-flung locations of Scotland. Grandparents take to a cuddly, huggable bear. This bear has $40,000 worth of technology in it. Microphones in the ears, speakers in the mouth, vision in the eyes. It's got a full sensate skin that can determine whether you're rubbing or squeezing or whatever, trying to duplicate the enormous bandwidth of communication that we as human beings have between each other just through nonverbal communication. The applications for this are amazing. We've got a dozen companies who are lining up to get prototypes of the huggable bear. And a manufacturer of the most expensive stuffed animal in the world who's donating 100 of those to us. They cost $2,400 a piece in FAO Schwartz or something, so that's very nice. But this is an interesting project. I just want to end on this one. What I've really shown you is just a very small segment of projects at the Media Lab, but they're really all intended to fit with that picture I painted earlier of thank you, Media Lab. How can we really impact humans deeply? I'm going to play through this one. Professor Todd Mackover at the Media Lab, he's really one of the founders of the Media Lab. He was there when Wiesner and Negroponte started out. He's a graduate of conservatory. He's not a technologist, but he was interested in a simple question, and that is, how could technology allow more people to create music? He was kind of fascinated by the fact that over the last 100 or 200 years, 200 years ago, everybody created music. If you were in a family, you played a violin, you played the piano. Nowadays, music is everywhere. Everybody listens to music, but very few people create it. And his mission in life has been to develop tools that enable everybody to create music. He's also one of the foremost digital composers of our generation. He performs all the time at the Kennedy Center in Washington and Lincoln Center and so forth with various robotic operas and digital operas of all kinds. He's a very creative fellow. He's a great technologist. And on the right is Adam Boulanger, a Ph.D. student in his group. And to the right of that is another one of our associates, a fellow named Dan Elsey, who has cerebral palsy and who has very, very, very little movement of his body. He can move his head and control it slightly. But he's a very intelligent fellow who lives up at the Tewksbury State Hospital in Massachusetts, and which we began working with a few years back. The idea behind Music, Mind, and Health, which is an area that Todd is studying, and a number of others in the world are studying today, you may have some stuff going on here at Princeton, I know, in the area, is that we know that music has profound effects on human beings, but we don't know why. And once we discover why, like with the genome, perhaps we can actually create music to deal with disabilities or with problems. He's studying that question, beginning with the technology that he's developed to enable people to create music. You've heard of the Mozart effect, which is, people were saying for years that listening to Mozart makes you smarter. We now know that that's not true. Actually, composing music and then conducting music makes you smarter. It actually does have an effect. And so that's very, very quickly what the idea is. Let me go through this quick. So hyperscore, I talked about this idea of hating asymmetries. Todd just hated the fact that regular people couldn't create music. And so he and his graduate students, over a period of years, have developed a graphical paint type application called hyperscore, which I have used. I'm very unmusical, but have composed some really interesting pieces with this. I wish I could demonstrate it to you. But through a paint type of algorithm, you can draw lines that specify notes, chords. The music will go through and use algorithms to actually create harmonies and other elements of music. It's really wonderful. Within an hour, you can be using this to actually create music. And we worked with, over the past year, a group of patients at the Tewksbury State Hospital, including Dan, to enable him to use this tool, to understand how this tool could be used, and to provide him devices, physical devices for interacting with this. Since Dan cannot really use his arms and his legs, we had to provide him with an infrared tracker for actually controlling the screen here. That's not, tremendously innovative technology, but we did that. And then we provided him with an infrared tracker for playing it back and actually conducting it. Within hyperscore, you can not only compose it, but when you play it back, you can actually change the way in which the composition itself is delivered as someone would in a real life performance. So in the short amount of time I have, what I'd just like to do, this was the finale at the conference that we had at MIT back in May, in which Professor Mackover, Adam Boulanger, and Dan actually performed here. This is on stage at the Kresge Auditorium. I'll get this going in a second. And this was the finale. I'll just turn this over and we'll just watch this for a short amount of time.
So as Adam described, this is kind of what we've set up here. Dan usually uses an infrared tracker on his head, which he's very good at, actually. Since we worked with him 3 years ago, he knows hyperscore very well, and he's really good at it. So all those incredibly straight lines, he drew himself. He drew them all with his head tracker. He makes all the melodies himself, and he now teaches hyperscore both at the hospital and in various other places. So he used the infrared system to make his hyperscore piece. And Adam designed a special infrared system. He's just changed into a new infrared system, which is used for the performance. So in the performance, everything in the piece you're about to hear is going to be shaped by the way Dan moves his head. And so we look at that with the camera. We have to analyze that data. We have to take certain information out of the data. We do that even for Yo-Yo Ma. We can't just take the bows here. We have to look at what the gesture really is. So for Dan, we're looking at a lot of movement, a little movement, up, down. Is it a smooth movement or a jagged movement? So that he can think of things like, does he want to make the music very delicate for a second, or does he want to make it really grow? And so that's what he'll be able to do. It comes out of that system and goes into what Adam called mapping, where you take Dan's gesture and figure out what result you want to have in the music. That goes to a synthesizer, and then you'll hear it. And another special feature with what you'll see now is that one of our undergraduate students named Rachel Rapolo has taken that same data from Dan's performance and has turned it into incredible images that we'll show while Dan is playing. Now these images are very interesting and they're nice to look at and they move while Dan plays, but they're really interesting for two other reasons as well. One is that you might think that Dan's movement is imprecise, but when you watch the movement captured by Rachel, you'll see that it's very, very, very precise. He knows exactly what he's doing and can control it very carefully when he's making music. The other thing, actually I forgot what the other thing is, that's good enough. And
he was killing time while Adam set up the infrared tracker.
Also worked on this project. And Zachary's job was to go in between the tracking system and Rachel's graphics so that we know what the shape of these lines are. So, you ready, Dan? Yeah. You ready, Adam? Yeah. Okay, so I think now you're going to hear the world premiere of My Eagle Song, composed and performed by Dan Elsey.
Dan actually performed there on the stage week before last. AARP, the Association for Retired People, had its major convention up in Boston. Dan performed that at the Boston Convention Center for 15,000 people. He now teaches hyperscore at schools throughout Massachusetts. So it's just an amazing story, and one that that makes me feel good that I'm at the Media Lab and part of all this. Just to summarize, I have a very strong belief that innovations, that a great way for us to direct our resources and efforts are innovations for people who are disabled, who are disadvantaged, who are disenfranchised, because it's my sincere belief that innovations that are directed at them are doing good and doing well for the world, but will be innovations that will eventually impact all of society. So I can really see devoting the Media Lab to those ideas alone. And I have to convince my sponsors that that's a good idea. So that's really my comments. I did promise one gadget here, and then I'll open it up to questions. In that vein of innovations directed at people who are disadvantaged and my belief that will impact all of society, I brought along, just if anybody wants to play with it here, one of the $188 laptops, I think. This, as you well know, or you may know, came out of the Media Lab. The ears there are, we're not to the point where we can do output on the screen here. Or if you do, it's very tricky and I'd never be able to do it. But the ears here come out of the Viral Computing Mesh Network group, which has been Andy Lippman's group at the Media Lab, which has been around for about 10 years, whose basic idea was to circumvent the central telecommunications infrastructure and for kids or anyone with a laptop to be able to communicate directly with one another in terms of a mesh network, a concept that I'm sure you're familiar with, but here it's realized in a product. I believe that mesh networking of this type will be in every laptop computer within 5 years. Another thing that came out of the Media Lab, Professor Mary Lou Jepson, and it's going to be hard to see here today, but as you dim the screen, when you get to the lowest position here, I wish I could show you, it becomes a daylight readable display. So instead of being backlit, it's now lit by ambient light coming from the front. And this is a new architecture for display technology, variable display technology, that the folks at One Laptop Per Child managed to encapsulate in this display for $35 a shot. That was pretty impressive. There are many other innovations in this device that I think will find their way. Incidentally, I think, God, if laptops don't have daylight readable displays within 5 years, somebody's really brain damaged, and I think this is going to make it happen. Because I'm always trying to do that. Just the form factor of this thing, I think, is really quite amazing. I'm not going to drop it from 5 feet here, but it really was meant to be dropped. It was meant in design. The design sensibility of this thing is really terrific. You notice the kind of rough surface here, so it doesn't slide off of your table and you drop it, because kids who have this, they'll get it once and there's not going to be maintenance, right? And so this came out of the Media Lab. Nicholas Negroponte is taking this out to the world. It's a real challenge. He's fighting that battle now. You'll be able to buy these yourself if you like for $388 for 2. I'm not advertising, but he just announced that from One Laptop Per Child. It's not formally part of the Media Lab anymore, but we do have collaboration. About 5 different professors and groups at the Media Lab work with One Laptop Per Child. But this really increases my belief that it's very profitable to pick a problem like, how can kids learn in developing countries when they don't have schools? What technology would make that possible? And when you do and invest in that, I think you're going to find innovations that are going to impact everything. So that's the story of the Media Lab, and that's my talk for today. So I'll open it up to questions.
I'm interested in how you define problems. I've worked in international development and global health for the past 15 years, and so I'm very impressed with the One Laptop Per Child. But when you talk about the external funding that you're getting and sort of the seed funding from industry, and then do the professors then have the opportunity to get that funding once they come up with an idea, or are they going out and getting other funding, or they fund problems?
Well,
how does that?
Good question. I'll give you the quick business model. All the money from sponsors goes to me. I've been distributed. I basically distribute evenly, but when I see areas that are more interesting than others, music, mind, and health, biomechatronics, I'm now using my ability to distribute that money to create collaboration. The big problem I've noticed coming from industry to the academic world, this might have been more obvious to you, is that collaboration is not necessarily the coin of the realm. And I believe very strongly that although individual inspiration is important, that collaboration is going to create some of the big solutions that we talk about. So basically, I get the money. It historically has been distributed basically, every professor gets about 6 graduate students and a certain discretionary funding for equipment. But I'm now putting the money over to 3 or 4 efforts, such as music, mind, and health, biomechatronics, effective computing, autism, and communication, that I think together with the consensus of folks who I meet with and talk to and lunch with are going to be profitable areas, important areas.
I wanted to know what your role was in starting Infinity Pharmaceuticals, and also how you chose to make it different than other biotech companies that already exist.
Okay. Well, I'll just give you the quick skinny on Infinity. Infinity was created around really 3 concepts. One is that diversity-oriented chemistry would generate the opportunity to bring more molecules, thousands and millions of molecules, into the test phase than previous techniques. It came out of Stu Schreiber's lab at Harvard. Obviously using the human genome and our understanding of apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, by being able to describe the networks that contribute to that, would also be a profitable approach. The third leg of that stool was by taking those 2 scientific hypotheses and creating the world's, let's say, a gold standard for bioinformatics, to tie all that together, that you would create new therapies and drugs in record time. So it was founded on that simple proposition: diversity-oriented chemistry, understanding the pathways that lead to apoptosis, programmed cell death, and which cause it not to go right, and then the fact that information technology and bioinformatics could accelerate the process. We had to prove that concept by getting the market. My role was as kibitzer. I was the guy who'd run a company before, not a biotech company, so I participated in getting the funding, in telling the story. I'm pretty good at getting a story straight, in hiring the initial team, and getting the bioinformatics drug. I actually rolled up my sleeves and hired a bunch of a dozen people to build what I call the gold standard bioinformatics structure. And then I went on the board, and now I just criticize, like board members do, I think. Okay.
I was wondering whether you'd have any advice for Princeton undergrads who are interested in making a difference in some way or another in the world within the private science and technology sector.
Help define that. By private science and technology sector, you mean?
Not academia, not just not any part, not the media, just companies.
Okay. So my observation has been that we are seeing the rise of discretionary money within companies that are doing well. Google, obviously, is the most obvious. To adopt that philosophy that I just talked about, that innovation for people who are disabled or disadvantaged could ultimately lead to innovations, and besides, it's good PR. So my advice is, I think, contact me, because of our sponsors, I would say a third are hiring Media Lab students out of the Media Lab with the idea in mind that they will now begin to grow their rather limited but growing efforts to work in these areas. You're not going to find all the companies doing it. But oddly enough, even Asian consumer electronics companies are spending a lot of money right now on research for the aging. Because they think it's a good market, but it's also good publicity in Asia right now. So the opportunities are there. You just have to look carefully and know who's doing it. Those opportunities, I don't think were there in those numbers 5 or 10 years ago. Well, with the Yale hat.
Take it off the mic. Maybe this one might be a little bit happier.
No, you can put the hat back on.
Right?
Yeah.
To make you happy.
Yes.
So to answer my question, last year I did have the honor of speaking to one of your lab directors. One of the lab areas you're championing yourself. I've had technology runs in the car. And I was able to speak to her for quite a while. Met her again last spring semester, just to remember my event. But having said that, I'd like to say that I have a little disagreement. I'll tell you why, and I'll keep it short. Affective technology, I know Marvin Minsky and his recent book was a major champion of that. But in my point of view, it is really perhaps just suited for FA, Schwartz, or media or entertainment, because it kind of makes it my feeling a little bit to encourage people to be less professional, intellectual. And then I'll finish it up with this final punchline. Last week I was at a lecture from a Harvard psychology professor, Daniel Gilbert, and he was at Princeton Koch Hall there in a very large public lecture. The gist of his lecture was that people don't think and would act gut-wise so often, encourage people to think. That was the gist of his topic. He gave a lot of examples and theories about that. So that kind of counteracts the two opposing points of view. He's saying less effective technology in human behavior is why people make so many mistakes. And of course, Marvin Minsky and Russell Picard would say the opposite. I just want to offer one more point, if I can, about creativity then. Perhaps it's something that MIT Media Lab could also champion as a new project, something related to this area to Charles Google's from West Coast Harvard teams they came from. Perhaps you can take, there are people at Inform.com, which translates the words database, news database into geometries and mathematics. Perhaps you can have knowledge base meshed with that, so that you can translate words into groups of geometries that are related mathematically to another group of geometry. And of course, we don't know whether English words translate into math that automatically correlate to mathematical formulas.
We've got somebody doing that, Hugo Liu, at the BA Lab. He's doing that around the concept of taste.
What's his last name?
Hugo Liu, L-I-U.
Okay.
Hugo. Postdoc. To your first question,
which group is it in?
he's actually postdoc in Patty May's group.
Oh.
But watching conversations between Ross Picard and Marvin Minsky is worth the price of admission. Those two do not agree. So any idea that they're together on the same idea, don't ask me why. Okay. But seriously, I think those debates are great. They're deep and philosophical debates about artificial intelligence. Can machines think? I mean, we all know about those. My feeling on all this is now, let's pick some important problems and see how the solutions arise. Let's drive it by the solutions to problems rather than these abstract philosophical debates at the McCosh Hall or at Kresge Auditorium, which have been taking place for 40 years. I was amazed to hear that Marvin Minsky still doesn't speak to some of the early innovators in artificial intelligence. And I asked him about that the other day. And I said, how can you be on the same campus and not speak to them? Don't you come together at cocktail parties? But so I think there's been a lot of foolishness in those fields, a lot of egos. Let's get those all behind us and let's just see if we can't solve some problems, and I think we'll discover some important new ideas.
I have a question on your business model. Do you actually license your technology or give it to the sponsor organization outright?
Yeah, so here's the bit. So everybody has access to the intellectual property, basically royalty-free on a worldwide basis, non-exclusive. They license it through the MIT Technology Licensing Office. I'm sure you have an equivalent here. About 20 different things have been licensed over the years and actually put into products. Many of them in startup companies, but some of those in larger companies.
Speaking of cocktail parties, we have a reception waiting down the hall. So why don't we take one last question here, perhaps, and let Frank will be here to answer more questions on a one-on-one basis.
You left one thing out of your presentation, which was superb.
I left many things out. I left many things out.
No, the very first way you start, the Princeton experience. I spent most of my sabbaticals in Italy in aeronautical engineering, and I brought back some students. They all were planning to go to MIT. I talked them out of it. They all eventually came to Princeton. When they look back on their educational process, at least two of them I can speak for, what they remember besides the quality of the technical education was living in the project on Harrison Street where all the other students of all the various disciplines were there. And that's led them to take superior positions in Italy. I don't see that. You covered the two major thought processes, the way I think about problems. The thought process that goes with science and engineering, and the one that goes with the arts, the music, the sense. I usually use the term the senses, the see, the hear, etc. But you did not talk about in your lab the broader aspect that we get here in a Princeton education. That's something I'm just very proud of. Well, and you said you were very proud of, which pleased me a great deal.
I would tell you, again, having gone through the MIT education and having it compare unfavorably to what I think the Princeton education might have been. Although I admit, my wife up there, things were good. It was a good thing to do. You know, you look back at your life, and you might
smart enough not to stay in the air.
Well, they were aerospace engineers were pumping Tasty Freeze in California when I got out. I didn't have any choice. But in many ways, the Media Lab is a shining example and is very, in some sense, Princeton-like within the MIT world. And one of my goals, when I look at my 5-year, 10-year plan for my job at MIT right now, is to spread that kind of cohesiveness, true interdisciplinary interaction on both kind of a technical and academic and a personal level to the rest of MIT. And I've expressed that to Susan Hockfield, and she's encouraged me to create collaborative projects with places like CSAIL and the Aeronautical Engineering Department, where I graduated from. And so I think maybe one of the contributions I can make with MIT's agreement is to try and bring some of that sensibility to MIT, because it's a great institution, and the more it's humanized, I think the more it's an asset to itself.
Let us not hold up.
Yeah, I think we're holding up cocktails. That's the fourth law, never stand in the way of cocktails.
Let us, please join me in thanking Frank. Thanks again, Frank. So please join us. We have a reception down in the atrium. Just walk out these doors, take a right.